Welcome to the first retro gaming video. This is about an Athlon build that I did for Windows 98. So this motherboard is a Gigabyte GA7VM. It's got one AGP slot, 3 PCI slots, 3 SD RAM slots, a couple of IDE slots. It's based on the Bio chipset. Not much to say. And this is a slot A motherboard for Athlon Classic. And for ports, we've got a couple of PS2 ports, a couple of USB ports, a couple of serial, parallel and onboard audio. Next up, we've got the Athlon 500 MHz CPU. It's a slot A. It's got a golden orb cooler on it, which was a well-known cooler back in the day. Here we have just a generic 10100 network card. A Sound Blaster Live 5.1 sound card. A Diamond Multimedia TNT2 Ultra 32 meg 3D card. And last but not least, a 12 meg Voodoo 2 card, also made by Diamond Multimedia. You can see the pass-through for VGA there. Now, it's amazing how very little building computers has changed these days. This is actually going into a fairly recent case, a very cheap case, and nothing special, just a full ATX case. Just lining it up on the motherboard standoffs. First screw goes in. It's really quite surprising how people think that building a computer is hard. Even back in these days, it was a very basic thing of just putting it together and essentially turning it on. Sort of around this era that the computers sort of got a lot less interesting to build, because there was a lot less to actually do to get them working. There's almost no jumpers on this motherboard. It's all basically set automatically or through the BIOS. The RAM that I've got in this board, it's two 256 meg sticks of 133 megahertz SD RAM, made by Kingston. Yeah, it's just the kind of RAM I had lying around. I could have gone up to 768 meg of RAM, but the operating system that I'll be running on this machine is actually Windows 98, which has problems if you try to use over 512 meg of RAM. it's all basically screwed down. Just plug in the optical drive IDE cable and the hard drive IDE cable. Now, using a round IDE cable for the hard drive for no other reason than it's what I had available at the time that I put everything in this case. Next up, put in the CPU. Fan on the fan header. Slide the CPU down into the slot. Make sure it's firmly clipped in place. Next up is front port headers, so all your lights and buttons at the front of the computer work on. Yeah, just working via the details listed on the actual motherboard there. This is the most tedious bit of the build, really. The rest of it's very, very quick and simple. The case, I already had the optical drive, the hard drive, and the floppy drive still in it. You can see a little bit of a mess of wires just under my chin there. That's actually all the cables from a 4 fan controller. I've actually got 3 80mm fans running off that controller. One at the front of the case, one at the rear of the case, and one on the side of the case that'll be blowing down across the Voodoo 2 card. It's not the most neatest cabling job I've done, but it really doesn't need to be. These old machines really don't put out all that much heat, at least not at this speed of CPU. One thing is that the Voodoo 2 was well known, so in with the network card first. Next up, we're putting the Voodoo 2 in. Not the Voodoo 2, sorry. Next up is the sound card, the Sound Blaster Live 5.1. This was a fantastic sound card back in the day. I remember when it first came out, I actually bought one brand new. Next up we do have the Voodoo 2 card. Now these things were quite known to run fairly hot. I will eventually actually put heat sinks on this video card to help with the heat dissipation. But for now, just having a fan blowing over it is sufficient enough cooling to keep it going. Last but not least is the TNT2 card. Now this PC, the specs of it are quite they're quite good for the era of the system it was going, and it's all fairly period correct. It's about what I was running back then. But that's the build done. All that's left to do is